Hello, my friends, and welcome. I'm Susan Smith, and welcome into my studio, Stitched by Susan. Let me just scooch over and welcome the Instagram people. I have to do that as a separate little deal. Okay, they're in. Good, good. It's a process. Back to the comments. Good, a few of you already tuned in. Dorothy, good morning from sunny Saskatoon, which is in Saskatchewan, Canada. I know exactly where that is. Spring is back after a big snowstorm. Awesome. Well, let's chat for just a second while we give a few more people an opportunity to join in on the various platforms. As you maybe know already, I'm on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram every day through the entire month of April, mostly mornings Pacific time. So for me, it's 9 a.m. in the morning right now. Depending on where you're watching from in the world, it may be very different for you. Anyway, each day we're just talking about mostly machine quilting related topics. Although today I'm stepping a little bit down a rabbit trail and telling you a bit of my story. I know there are some of you viewers who are regular and faithful, and thank you very much for tuning in each and every time so often. I recognize your names, but also there are a lot of new people here who are maybe newer to my little corner of the quilting world. So I thought I would tell my story, and I'll try and keep it to a few sentences. Good luck with that. So we'll see how good I am at chatting sort of off the cuff. I mean, lots of these story elements I've told before, but I'll try and keep it to 10 minutes or so. And honestly, I'd love to hear from some of you as well, maybe a little bit of what made you the quilter that you are today. But I'm also just going to talk about some of the things that have formed the person that I am today, because quilter is not all that I am. So we saw Dorothy, Marie, Suzanne. Good afternoon from a very wet Bath, UK. Hope your cough is better. No comment, really. Denise, hi, Susan. Carolina from Lyon, France. Awesome. Kathy, Lynn, Melody, Carolyn. Good, good, good. Looks like sound and everything is great. I do love seeing all your comments because it assures me that I am, in fact, going across the airwaves. As always, you're welcome to type in questions or comments as we go along. But this whole month of April has just been these casual chats about machine quilting related topics. I mostly quilt at a long arm quilting machine these days, but I'm brushing up on my skills at my domestic sewing machine as well. I know Gabby, who's here, General and Oblox. I never know how to say your actual Instagram handle. Anyway, I know that you quilt at a sit-down machine and you do beautiful quilting, so I appreciate that you tune in. Let's get to my story, and then we'll take some questions and comments and kind of get back to that, and I'll try and keep an eye on it as we go. And fingers crossed the camera stays going today. I've plugged everything in within an inch of its life, so fingers crossed. Okay, a little bit of my story. When I was 4 years old, my parents moved across Canada basically for religious reasons and started kind of pioneering agriculturally. And so from some of my earliest memories, we did not have electricity or running water or flush toilets or television or any of those things. And this was very instrumental in shaping my life, honestly. We lived in, we upgraded over the years from the first log cabin to a much larger 4-bedroom, 2-bath log home, etc. So there was flex in there over the years, but we lived fairly pioneer lifestyle until I was about 15 years old. So that's a very large chunk of my childhood and formative years, if you will. You know, I look back at it now from the vantage point of some 40 years later, and I think, you know, what were the disadvantages and what were the advantages? And the disadvantages, not surprisingly, were, you know, it was remote. It was certainly hard work. And I lacked some social skills when I got into my teen years, things like using the telephone or meeting new people, because I did not do that sort of stuff very often. So was that a disadvantage? Yes, it was. Was that massively outweighed by the advantages? Also very much true. So we certainly learned how to work. We certainly learned how to be resourceful because we lived a long way from the nearest store. So you learned how to fix things. You learned how to make do. There was all kinds of things we learned. Hospitality was a huge feature of my parents as people, our church involvement, just who we were. And so I learned how to cook for groups of people and how to host things and how to organize things. And these skills really have followed me through my entire life. So it has taken different forms over the years. You know, when our kids were in high school, we were the open house on the block. We were the house where you landed after school and came for snacks and to lounge around and watch movies and Friday night game nights and all that sort of stuff. And I loved being that mom. Recently, you know, our kids are all gone from home now. We're empty nesters. So for the last more than 10 years, I've been cooking at our church's summer camps. So that's one of the ways that I exercise hospitality, if you will, but I utilize all those skills of cooking for more than 100 people. Sometimes I've done up to about 225, 3 meals a day, not by myself, mind you. I do have a team, but just that whole organizational process. And I love that. I love that I have that skill set, and that is so fulfilling to me. So alongside my journey as a quilter and a creator and now a content creator, this has been a big, big part of my life. And look, the camera is still working. I'm so, so pleased. Oh, Darlene's tuning in from Colbert. I know Darlene in person. That's awesome. Laura, I'm just double checking that we're not having any camera or sound issues. So it's looking good. Looking good. Okay, back to the story. During those years of childhood and living in a cabin and not having electricity, my mom was very skilled in what I call the old-fashioned crafts. So the crocheting, the knitting, the quilting, the sewing of garments, all those things. So I learned to do them alongside her. And that has certainly been influential in my growth as a quilter. As long as I can remember, I've worked with textiles and made clothes. For example, I made most of my own clothes as a teenager. And so just it seems almost instinctive to me, this knowledge of what fabric will and won't do, you know, and as a long armer, how much I can make quilt out, for example, or how much I can take in with my quilting. I've worked with textiles forever, so that comes easily to me. And one of my challenges has been learning to think through what it is that I'm actually doing without thinking about it, if that makes sense. So you all have been helpful in that way because you ask good questions. And in presenting sessions like this or my live and unscripted sessions twice a month where I'm quilting a project in real time, that all helps me to literally put specific thoughts and steps to the things that I've just done for so long. So that's been a fun learning process, and I have appreciated those skills. Certainly the art of creating handcrafts, whether quilts, whether knitted, embroidered, what have you, that has been foundational, fundamental, if you will, to my person. It has been therapy. You know, quilters joke, quilting is my therapy. I mean, yeah, cheaper than a therapist. We have all kinds of little phrases that we trot out. And we're joking, it's kind of tongue in cheek, but also it's really true. Crafting, creating has helped me through some of the toughest times in my life. And I know some of you have those stories too, because I hear them from you. And I know it is so. There is something about creating something that you give that's made with your own hands, with your own creative and thoughtful and imaginative process that is essential to the human psyche. And we quilters get to do that on the regular. Isn't that awesome? Okay, let's check in with a few comments and then we'll dive into a few more stories. That's me in a nutshell, but you know, we've got some more stories we can tell for sure. So let's just see. Misty listening to some podcasts. Janet in Luxembourg. Awesome. Gaynor, Nita, Victoria, Julie. Gaynor I know is from South Africa. We're busy restoring two 1930s Berninas. So lovely to piece a quilt on an old machine that could probably tell me lots of stories from yesteryear. Actually, this is a tiny part of my story. The picture that's in the back of my thumbnail for today is a treadle sewing machine. This was my mom's. My mom and dad were from a very conservative Mennonite background and they didn't do jewelry. So when they got engaged, my dad's engagement gift to my mom, as the story's been told to me, and he'll tell me if I'm wrong because he's probably watching this, was this treadle sewing machine. And they were married in 1954. So that gives you a time frame. So that sewing machine is literally what I learned to sew on as a child. Throughout the years, there were periods of time before we went pioneering and then after again that this machine was hooked up to a motor, you know, and had a foot pedal and was electric, if you will. It still had the belt, but it was motor driven at some point during its life. But now I have it in my home and it is a treadle. There is something absolutely therapeutic about sewing on a treadle. If you've never done it, I encourage you to give it a whirl. I know not everyone has room for one in their house, but for me, this sewing machine is such a time capsule, if you will, of those childhood memories sewing alongside my mom. Now, my mom's been passed away almost 30 years ago already, so it's been a long time since we've done it together. Those memories are so deep in me. And for me now to go and sit at that treadle sewing machine and sew things, and I still do to this day. It's been serviced over the years, but it still sews like a champion. Um, there's just something that's grounding, that's steadying, that's even just the sound of it, just that rhythmic moving of the treadle with your feet. It's just awesome. So that is a big part of my story, and it's a very tangible piece of it that sits in my quilting studio. Nita, there's truth. Let's put this up. There's truth to quilting as our therapy. It takes time and thoughtfulness and slowing down. And Nita has a PhD in mental health. See, Nita, I have no initials after my name, but instinctively I feel this value. And you've kind of put words to it. It does make us slow down. It does make us be thoughtful. I know tons and tons of studies have been done about the value to mental health, to people that have ADHD and things like that, of just this value of focusing and getting into something, doing things with your hands. There's just a million reasons. And for me, the reason boils down to it feels good, it feels positive, I feel better after I've created something. So great. Someone's saying, that's so sweet, your mom's treadle machine. Absolutely. Susan, your masterclass upped my long arm skills. I will talk about the masterclass a moment at the end, but I just want to make sure I've got back through these comments before I keep going further. I'm not sure what other stories you guys want to hear. I mean, I have lots and lots of them, and maybe I should give just a quick sort of timeline of what my quilting journey has looked like in case you haven't heard that one before. Again, my mom was a quilt maker too, and it was very seasonal in our house. Summers we were certainly busy gardening and farming and raising sheep and chickens and all the things. But in the winter, and we were in northern Canada, keep in mind, long, you can't even see my hands, long winters, that's when we did our crafts. So one of the things Mom did was make quilts, and she was a hand quilter, and so that's how I began too, was hand quilting. And I was well into my adulthood, probably getting close to 40, before I ever even thought about quilting at a mechanized machine. And at the time, we were living in the city we are now in Spokane, Washington. The kids were in high school and, growing up, and I had a little more time on my hands. I did not work outside the home at that time. And so I wanted to make quilts, and I had zero friends that were hand quilters. And if you've ever hand quilted a project, it takes a long time all by yourself, and I wanted to make more quilts than that. So that's what kind of nudged me into what then kind of felt like sacrilege a little bit. Machine quilting? Anyway, I went and took a class at a local quilt shop on quilting at the domestic machine. And right away, I just totally fell in love with that. It feels like a different skill than hand quilting, and it very much is. But it's just another way to finish your quilts, and I fell in love with it. I could do it. I enjoyed it. It felt creative, and it gave me that possibility of doing quilts a little faster than hand quilting them all by my lonesome. So did that for a period of time, and then I had a friend, Mary, who at that time was a pretty new friend. Now she's a longtime friend, but at that time was a pretty new friend, and she had a little, I think a Tin Lizzie, small long arm in her home, and she invited me over to do a lap quilt and a baby quilt one afternoon. And so I quilted the two of those projects that day. It was a bit of a marathon because I did not know what I was doing, but totally fell in love with it that day. And then began to look for my first long arm machine, which was a used one, a very well loved one. And the rest is kind of history, but I dove in with both feet. And those of you who are my students or who come to my YouTube classes, you'll hear me say this refrain often. Don't be scared of your machine, just get in there and play with it. And I know this by experience because that's how I learned. 10 years ago, there weren't very many YouTube videos out there. Certainly, I did not have a dealer at all because I bought my machine privately to help me figure things out, even figuring out the mechanics of the machine, but then figuring out lots of the topics we've talked about this week, like how do you stop and start, and do you match top and bottom thread, and what thread should I use in the first place? I didn't have answers to those questions, so my solution was I just dove in with both feet and started quilting and figured it out as I went. And, you know, if I had any advice to give regarding that, it's don't start with your most precious quilts, right? Because you're apt to have some errors and some less than perfect results and maybe even some things you wish you'd done differently. But it's the best way to learn is just by doing. And that's how I did it too. So I just dived in and started quilting for myself and pretty soon started quilting for hire and then just quilted more and more and more quilts. So that was kind of my journey there. I'm on my third long arm now, and this is the first one that I have purchased new, and I now quilt on a Bernina Q24, which I just adore. Okay, I got to show you this one, the sewing center, the sewing corner. Such a lovely story. I've never used a treadle, but wonder if it would be like patting your head and rubbing your tummy. I use that analogy all the time when I talk about it because it's exactly like that. So a treadle, you're pedaling with your feet, which is causing a belt to turn the flywheel. But the tricky part is if you just start pedaling, the belt might go forwards and it might go backwards. So you literally have to lift your hand off the fabric, turn the flywheel to like prime it, launch it, and then start pedaling and drive the fabric at the same time. So it's exactly like patting your head and rubbing your stomach. And maybe a third thing as well. Dorothy grew up a similar way. Her mother sewed all their clothes on a treadle Singer. Ignored corner of the northeast corner of Scotland. I love that. So good, so good. TNA Tampa, tell us about the first quilt for a customer you had that was a problem and how you handled it. I don't know if problem exactly describes it, but I do remember the first quilt that stumped me, if you will. And I'm like 4 or 5 quilts into my long arm journey at this point, right? It's very new. And the quilt belonged to my husband's sister, so my sister-in-law. And it was a project she had made as a gift for her daughter, and it was a log cabin in lovely colors, but the border of it was kind of like a memory or signature quilt. People had embroidered their signatures as part of this wedding gift, and so they were set in all different directions and all different colors, shapes, and sizes on this kind of white on white background. And I remember looking at that thinking, what do I quilt? I don't want to quilt across the embroidery. You know, I can't do keystones. I can't do piano keys. I can't do crosshatch. What do I quilt on this? My solution, and boy, I should fish up pictures of this original quilt. My solution was I made a kind of oak leaf-ish outline and I laid an oak leaf over each name and I quilted around the leaf and left what was in it was the name and the unquilted portion and then filled in around it. And it actually turned out pretty cool. So there you go. That was my first stumper of a quilt. Barbara, oh, you're so sweet. I got to put this one up. It's huge. Basically, you don't need extra letters behind your name to be a phenomenal teacher in person. I appreciate all of that, Barbara. And you, by the way, are a great human being yourself. Victoria, I also learned to sew on my Nan's treadle sewing machine. I hope I'll be able to get it back from my birthday town far, far away. I hope you can too. It sure is nice to have that tangible memory sitting alongside you. Loretta is asking, do you ever get the urge to hand quilt and piece again? I do. Yes, I do, Loretta. And I actually still do a bit from time to time. It doesn't usually make it into my content because it's not as easy to film on camera when I'm sitting in my couch doing some slow stitching, but I absolutely do that sort of stuff. Yes, it's very peaceful. Very peaceful. Okay, I love this. Laura, that sounds like start a car with a manual transmission on a hill. I'm happy to let you know that I can do that also. One of the beauties of growing up a farm girl, am I right? This person is asking, what other long arms did you have and why are you loving the Bernina now? Okay, let me keep this in like 2 sentences because it is a bit off topic for today. I had gamels beforehand. Initially, I had a very plain, no bell, no whistle, except for stitch regulation gamel. Secondly, I had a Gamel Elevate, which is their very entry-level computerized system that I never really learned how to use. And thirdly, I have my Bernina now. What do I love about it? I mean, I love the gamels too. So this is not really a comparison or a complaint, but the Bernina is particularly smooth and lightweight and easy to maneuver. There are lots of other things I love, but that'll give you one to go on. Marie Suzanne, how did you find YouTube and your gift of teaching on it? Great question, Marie. And this is a part of my story. It really, really is. quilting was very much a hobby for me. Though I did it for hire, it was a little side hustle. It was a little hobby for me 4 or 5 years ago. When the pandemic hit, my husband's job dried up in a minute. And I know lots of you experience this in some way in your families too. And so you can relate, and you've got to pivot. So for us, pivoting meant he had to find another job, and didn't seem to be one available, or I had to find a job. And of course, everybody's looking for a job right then, so they're not thick on the ground. Or I had to make my quilting in some way pay the bills, be our bread and butter. And so at the same time, and this will seem funny to you guys, I've never been comfortable on camera or in front of audiences. I've never really done it. So I wouldn't say I was uncomfortable. I've just never done it. But when the pandemic first launched, those first few weeks, it felt like there was this desperate need for community. And I think quilters and creators are sociable people. So you saw sort of everybody and their aunt and uncle was getting on these little live, whether it was Instagram or YouTube or whatever, just talking, communicating. It was a way to get together, right? So I saw all these and thought, well, if they can do it, I can do it too. Or I often thought, well, I can do that good a job. I can have that good of a lighting. I can have that good of a microphone, right? So I started going live. So early, that first spring of the pandemic, I believe it was 2020, right? That April, I did much like I'm doing now. I did a little live session every day on just Instagram, and it was short, and I was inexpert, and that kind of got me over the hump, over my fear of cameras and microphones. And, the rest is kind of history. And my husband has been definitely instrumental in that too. You guys know him as Mr. Producer. He's usually behind the scenes, but now my YouTube production is much more, it has evolved. There are multiple cameras and, views and all that. He's the guy behind that. And he was always the one to say, let's try this, let's try that, because that's not I'm not bilingual in tech, let's just say. So that's kind of how I fell into that. Terry, what's nice about the treadle is if the power goes out, I can still sew. Funny story for you, Terry. One year, and this is quite a few years back, it was the night before Christmas, Christmas Eve, and as we always are, I'm still finishing up the last couple gifts, right? And I happen to be sewing pillowcases, because I give all my immediate family fresh pillowcases every Christmas, new pillowcases. And the power went out. What am I going to do? You have the solution. Fire up that treadle, finish the pillowcase, be ready on Christmas morning. So good. So good. Hayden is asking, why do you YouTube? And Hayden, I do it for the connection. I do it because this is a way that I can talk to you and help and encourage quilters that I never could do in person. I could not travel to all the places. I could not talk to this many people. Just to give you a ballpark, right now on these YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram platforms, I'm reaching about 5,000 people every day. And I'm not a large YouTuber. That's not a huge number in YouTube terms. But for me, that is something I could never do in person, right? And how remarkable is that I can talk to 5,000 people in a day? That's why I do it. I love quilting with you guys. Okay, this could go on forever. I don't even know where we're at for time. Let's have a peek. We've been 23 minutes already, and I promise to keep this short. There are lots and lots of comments coming in. I'll come back and read them. Here's one that's interesting, though. Janelle is asking, how much money have you invested in machines? So I could give you that number, but the truth of the matter is I have received back more than I've ever invested. And this was true already from my very first machine. I purchased it for $8,500 used. Now that's the price of a decent used car, and I knew that when I bought it. And it was part of my impetus to learn how to quilt good enough that I could take on quilts for hire. Because I'm frugal and because we needed the money, how could I pay for that machine? And I paid for it in about 18 months' time of hiring out quilts. And one of the great things about long arms, though, actually, is they hold their value well. So I was then able to resell it at a decent price, upgrade a little bit, and the same has proved to be true through my machines. So, but they are an investment. They definitely are an investment. They are equipment, and they're specialized equipment. Marie, Suzanne, you both make a wonderful team. Thank you for that. We certainly try. You should see us at our kitchen table sometimes in the mornings over coffee, wrangling over how we're going to do stuff, though. but it's all good. It's all good. All right, thanks you guys for joining me. Tomorrow, I'm not sure what the topic will be yet, but I will be back every day yet in the month of April. Don't forget, I've got a free workshop coming up on Saturday, day after tomorrow, April 27. 5 myths that tie freehand quilters in knots and how to break free of them. I have put a link in the YouTube and Facebook. It's in the notes, or in the description, I guess I should say. There's a link to register for it. And if you're on social media platforms like Facebook, like Instagram, you can actually type the word myth as a comment, and you'll get a little registration form. So feel free to come to that. It is absolutely free, and I'm going to be talking about 5 myths that I think are super common that really hold people back from diving into freehand quilting, and how I've broken through them, how some of my students have broken through them, and how you can too. So join me if you can for that. Yeah, that's happening on Saturday. So thanks for joining me today. Have a great day, and let's tune in again tomorrow. Don't forget thumbs up. Appreciate it.